These industrial barons and financiers knew that machinery to cut, bale, decorticate, separate the fiber from the high cellulose herd, and process hemp into paper or plastics was becoming available in the mid-1930s. Cannabis hemp would have to go. In DuPont's 1937 annual report to its stockholders, the company strongly urged continued investment in its new, but not readily accepted, petrochemical synthetic products. DuPont was anticipating radical changes from the revenue-raising power of government converted into an instrument for forcing acceptance of sudden new ideas of industrial and social reorganization. Protecting special interests. As the AMA's Dr. Woodward had asserted, the government's testimony before Congress in 1937 had in fact consisted almost entirely of Hearst's and other sensational and racist newspaper articles read aloud by Harry J. Anslinger, director of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics (FBN). This agency has since evolved into the Drug Enforcement Administration (DEA). Harry J. Anslinger was director of the new Federal Bureau of Narcotics from its inception in 1931 for the next 31 years, and was only forced into retirement in 1962 by President John F. Kennedy after Anslinger tried to censor the publications and publishers of Professor Alfred Lynn Smith, The Addict and the Law, Washington Post, 1961, and to blackmail and harass his employer, Indiana University. Anslinger had come under attack for racist remarks as early as 1934 by a U.S. Senator from Pennsylvania, Joseph Guffey, for such things as referring to ginger-colored niggers in letters circulated to his department heads on FBN stationery. Prior to 1931, Anslinger was Assistant U.S. Commissioner for Prohibition. Anslinger, remember, was handpicked to head the new Federal Bureau of Narcotics by his uncle-in-law, Andrew Mellon, Secretary of the Treasury under President Herbert Hoover. The same Andrew Mellon was also the owner and largest stockholder of the sixth-largest bank in 1937, in the United States, the Mellon Bank in Pittsburgh, one of only two bankers for DuPont from 1928 to the present. DuPont has borrowed money from banks only twice in its entire 190-year history, once to buy control of General Motors in the 1920s. Its banking business is the prestigious plum of the financial world. In 1937, Anslinger testified before Congress saying, "Marijuana is the most violence-causing drug in the history of mankind." This, along with Anslinger's outrageous racist statements and beliefs, was made to the Southern-dominated Congressional Committee and is now an embarrassment to read in its entirety. Virtually no one in America other than a handful of rich industrialists and their hired cops knew that their chief potential competitor, hemp, was being outlawed under the name marijuana. That's right. Marijuana was most likely just a pretext for hemp prohibition and economic suppression. Man-made fiber. The toxic alternative to natural fibers. The late 1920s and 1930s saw continuing consolidation of power into the hands of a few large steel, oil and chemical munitions companies. The U.S. federal government placed much of the textile production for the domestic economy in the hands of its chief munitions maker, DuPont. The processing of nitrating cellulose into explosives is very similar to the process for nitrating cellulose into synthetic fibers and plastics. Rayon, the first synthetic fiber, is simply stabilized gun cotton, or nitrated cloth, the basic explosive of the 19th century. Synthetic plastics find application in fabricating a wide variety of articles, many of which in the past were made from natural products. Beamed Lamet DuPont Popular Mechanics, June 1939, page 805. Consider our natural resources, the president of DuPont continued. The chemist has aided in conserving natural resources by developing synthetic products to supplement or wholly replace natural products. DuPont's scientists were the world's leading researchers into the processes of nitrating cellulose and were in fact the largest processor of cellulose in the nation in this era. The February 1938 Popular Mechanics article stated thousands of tons of hemp herds are used every year by one large powder company for the manufacture of dynamite and TNT. History shows that DuPont had largely cornered the market in explosives by buying up and consolidating the smaller blasting companies in the late 1800s. By 1902 it controlled about two-thirds of industry output. They were the largest powder company, supplying 40% of the munitions for the Allies in World War I. As cellulose and fiber researchers, DuPont's chemists knew hemp's true value better than anyone else. The value of hemp goes far beyond linen fibers. Although recognized for linen, canvas, netting and cordage, these long fibers are only 20% of the hemp stalk's weight. 80% of the hemp is in the 77% cellulose herd, and this was the most abundant, cleanest resource of cellulose fiber for paper, plastics and even rayon. The empirical evidence in this book shows that the federal government, through the 1937 Marijuana Tax Act, allowed this munitions maker to supply synthetic fibers for the domestic economy without competition. The proof of a successful conspiracy among these corporate and governing interests is simply this: in 1997 DuPont was still the largest producer of man-made fibers, while no American citizen has legally harvested a single acre of textile-grade hemp in over 60 years except during the period of World War II. An almost unlimited tonnage of natural fiber and cellulose would have become available to the American farmer in 1937, the year DuPont patented nylon and the polluting wood pulp paper sulfide process. All of hemp's potential value was lost. Simple plastics of the early 1900s were made of nitrated cellulose, directly related to DuPont's munitions-making process. Celluloid, acetate and ran were the simple plastics of that era, and hemp was well known to cellulose researchers as the premier resource for this new industry to use. Worldwide, the raw material of simple plastics, rayon and paper could be best supplied by hemp herds. Nylon fibers were developed between 1926 to 1937 by the noted Harvard chemist Wallace Carothers, working from German patents. These polyamides are long fibers based on observed natural products. Carothers, supplied with an open-ended research grant from DuPont, made a comprehensive study of natural cellulose fibers. He duplicated natural fibers in his labs and polyamides, long fibers of a specific chemical process, were developed. Curiously, Wallace Carothers committed suicide 1 week after the House Ways and Means Committee, in April of 1937, had the hearings on cannabis and created the bill that would eventually outlaw hemp. Coal tar and petroleum-based chemicals were employed, and different devices, spinnerets and processes were patented. This new type of textile, nylon, was to be controlled from the raw material stage, as coal, to the completed product, a patented chemical product. The chemical company centralized the production and profits of the new miracle fiber. The introduction of nylon, the introduction of high-volume machinery to separate hemp's long fiber from the cellulose herd, and the outlawing of hemp as marijuana all occurred simultaneously. The new man-made fibers MMFs can best be described as war material. The fiber-making process has become one based on big factories, smokestacks, coolants and hazardous chemicals, rather than one of stripping out the abundant, naturally available fibers. Coming from a history of making explosives and munitions, the old chemical dye plants now produce hosiery, mock linens, mock canvas, latex paint and synthetic carpets. Their polluting factories make imitation leather, upholstery and wood surfaces, while an important part of the natural cycle stands outlawed. The standard fiber of world history, America's traditional crop, hemp, could provide our textiles and paper and be the premier source for cellulose. The war industries, DuPont, Allied Chemical, Monsanto, etc., are protected from competition by the marijuana laws. They make war on the natural cycle and the common farmer. The DuPont Company by Richard Sanders, editor, Press for Conversion. In the 1930s, the DuPont and Morgan family empires dominated the American corporate elite and their representatives were central figures in organizing and funding the American Liberty League. The DuPont family was so complicit in this fascist organization that James Farley, FDR's postmaster general and one of his closest advisors, said the American Liberty League ought to be called the American Cellophane League because first it's a DuPont product and second, you can see right through it. Donald R. McCoy, Coming of Age. The DuPont Company, formed in 1802 by Elder Irini DuPont and Tumors, dominated U.S. gunpowder sales for more than a century. They were the main supplier of this product during many wars, including War of 1812, supplying the U.S. against Britain, Canada, South American Wars, supplying both Spain and Bolivar's republics. Mexican-American War, 1846, supplying the U.S. Indian Wars, 1827 to 1896, supplying Manifest Destiny's genocidal westward expansion. Crimean War, 1854, supplying both England and Russia. U.S. Civil War, 1861 to 1865, supplying the northern states. Spanish-American War, 1898, supplying the U.S. World War I, 1914 to 1918, supplied all U.S. orders. 40% of the Allies' needs. In 1897, when they agreed with European competitors to divide up the world, DuPont got exclusive control of gunpowder sales in the Americas. By 1905, DuPont had assets of $60 million and controlled all U.S. government orders. DuPont bought out 100 of its American competitors and closed most of them down, 1903 to 1907. In 1907, U.S. antitrust laws created two competitors for DuPont, and in 1912 the government ordered DuPont to divest from some explosives production. DuPont then diversified into newspaper publishing, chemicals, paints, varnishes, cellophane and rayon. World War I was particularly profitable. DuPont, the world's largest producer of dynamite and smokeless gunpowder, made unheard of net profits of $250 million. Between the wars, DuPont was the world's top manufacturer of explosives, the world's leading chemical company and the top producer of cars and synthetic rubber, another strategic war material. By the 1930s, it owned Mexican and Chilean explosive companies and a Canadian chemical company. Although still the top U.S. gunpowder supplier, this product represented only 2% of its total production. DuPont's General Motors Company funded a vigilante-terrorist organization to stop unionization in its Midwestern factories. Called the Black Legion, its members wore black robes decorated with a white skull and crossbones. Concealed behind their slitted hoods, this KKK-like network of white supremacist thugs threw bombs into union halls, set fire to labor activists' homes, tortured union organizers and killed at least 50 in Detroit alone. Many of their victims were blacks lured north by tales of good auto plant jobs. One of their victims, Reverend Earl Little, was murdered in 1931. His son, later called Malcolm X, was then 6. An earlier memory, his first, was a nighttime raid in 1929 when the Legion burnt down their house. Gerard Colby had this to say about the Black Legion in his book DuPont Dynasty, 1984. But corporate executives did not give up the tactic of vigilante groups, and on June 1, 1936, Cowdrick wrote Harry Anderson, GM's labor relations director, to ask his opinion of the Sentinels of the Republic. Anderson was apparently unaware of Irénée DuPont's support of this organization, but offered his own homebrew alternative. With reference to your letter of June 1 regarding the Sentinels of the Republic, he replied a few days later, I have never heard of the organization. Maybe you could use a little Black Legion down in your country. It might help. The Black Legion Anderson referred to was indeed a great help to General Motors in its struggle to prevent auto workers from unionizing. With members wearing black robes and slitted hoods adorned with white skull and crossbones, the Black Legion was the terror of Michigan and Ohio auto flells, riding like Klansmen through the night in car caravans, bombing union halls, burning down homes of labor militants, and flogging and murdering union organizers. The organization was divided into arson squads, bombing squads, execution squads, and anti-communist squads, and membership discipline on pain of torture or death was strictly enforced. Legion cells filled GM factories, terrorizing workers and recruiting Ku Klux Klansmen. Since 1933 the Black Legion's power had permeated police departments. The Legion, claiming 200,000 members in Michigan, was divided into distinct squads, each focused on a different aspect of their work for DuPont: arson, bombing, execution and anti-communism. The Legion's cells within GM factories intimidated workers, targeted Jews and recruited for the KKK. They worked together to stop raids and unions that demanded their labor rights.